Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How a Lack of Trust is Actually a Good Thing in Securing Retail Data. It's presented by Neturian and hosted by Retail Customer Experience. I'm Judy Model, editor of Retail Customer Experience, and I'll introduce our speaker in a minute, but I want to remind everybody to stick around as we have a live Q&A at the end. So today's topic is all about securing data in the retail environment. Retailers are operating differently today. They're moving out of locked corporate perimeters and into web on the go. So to better protect themselves and their customers, retailers can adopt a zero trust approach that safeguards data wherever it resides with a mantra of never trust, always verify. We're going to learn the definition of zero trust, how it improves retail operations and security, and why it enhances work from anywhere for retailers. And we'll also get some tips on getting started on a zero trust strategy. Our presenter today is Jason Graf, Vice President of Product Management for Neturian. Jason is a trusted, expert IT cybersecurity professional. His network security expertise, combined with his business acumen, enables him to drive product development at Neturian. He develops purpose-built solutions for retail and restaurant networks, which, when coupled with optional managed services by Neturian's Network Operations Center and Security Operations Center, is transforming business at over 20,000 locations in North America. And so with that, I will turn the webinar over to Jason.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so just to get started, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to people about this topic. We're going to talk about zero trust today, really just try to give a overall understanding of what this means in case you're hearing it in conversations or how it might influence your business. So just try to keep it, we won't try to get too far in the weeds here, just try to allow you to start asking some questions for yourself that you might be able to try to understand how this might fit into what you're doing today, or if you need to take this information back, to say a service provider or your IT group, or if you just happen to be over IT and security and things like that. So we'll talk about a little bit about what it is and what it isn't. How zero trust improves retail operations, how your organization may already have some things related to zero trust already in place, some of the challenges and opportunities that we see for retail, and then some tips of just some areas that you can get started if you're trying to figure out what you need to do. All right, so what zero trust is and it isn't. Judy alluded to this in her intro to this concept of never trust, always verify. Over time, typically within organizations, there's been this concept that, hey, if a device or a user is in a certain area, say inside the wall, that they're basically trusted, right? But you might just need, to verify some things. That where zero trust comes in is because, one is, people are going outside of the border being sort of the office walls, but applications are out there as well, right? If you think in retail, we've gone in most instances from, the applications or servers being possibly inside of the retail location to now many of them having either all or some components, in the cloud, in the internet. So the applications are also outside of the border. You've got things like guest Wi-Fi that you're allowing in. A lot of people are allowing, employees to access their network on their phones in order to be able to utilize their devices. So everything is really, accessing different resources in and out of everywhere. We're not just accessing sort of a resource inside. So we want to really never trust anything. Even somebody that brings a device and plugs it into what we consider a secure location, we really want to consider that to be a device that we need to verify always. So I talked about this concept of borderless and the store. So Zero Trust is a borderless environment. So, I know in retail specifically, there might not be a ton of use cases, say for remote access. I know there are some, owners, operators like to be able to access certain resources outside, but with many of the things going to the cloud anyway, those things are just always available. So everything becomes borderless. No assumptions, as I alluded to before. In the past, it was kind of, if you were inside the firewall, so to speak, you were safe. Definitely don't want to discredit, having firewalls and things of that nature to protect your environment. Everything is a layered approach, right? I mean, we're definitely going to still see the traditional mechanisms in place to secure us, but we can't just assume because we have a firewall that all that stuff that's inside is operating with the best intent. With Zero Trust, we have more of a focus on controlling access, right? Where in the past, once again, if you were inside and you were deemed a trusted party, you could have access to most of anything you want. The concept of controlling access is not obviously new. Organizations have been making efforts to control access to various resources for numbers of years. It's typically a sign of organizational maturity when there's some level of access control. It also typically requires some overhead, right? It's easier to just allow people to go to everything. So having technology and mechanisms in place and the associated policies, right, that indicate what should be allowed and not allowed. We've got more technology to do that. We've got more efficient and effective ways to do that. So those things over time have just improved, but you still have to pay attention to it. You still have to do it. Wide open is still the easiest way, no matter what. Assume breach. In Zero Trust, we assume that every environment, if you are not observing what's going on in your environment through some of the things we'll kind of talk in here, the assumption is that there's probably something in your environment going on that you should probably know about. That could be, it could be something very serious, like something that's potentially exploiting financial information or extracting data, or it could just be, some, malware that's been put on your, PC for Bitcoin mining or some other nefarious act. Sometimes organizations get sort of randomly hit by something just through email, and then sometimes they're being targeted, for specific information, and either one could happen. And so you just don't know. But we definitely we've gotten to the point where if you're not doing something to actively understand what's going on in your environment, you should probably assume that you would find something. There's something going on. The question is just how long it'll take you to figure it out. There's just too many ins and outs of environments now, right? To expect, everything's changed. 20 years ago, there was very few things that were on the network. Definitely didn't have personal devices. Now you got people bringing in personal devices. You got, every vendor has a different device that's going on your network. So it's just become a lot of risk is involved. Monitor, control inbound and outbound. I think the key here is really is outbound. Inbound traffic, has been fairly easy to identify and understand because, for one thing, most people are not serving resources on inside the network, right? I mean, most people have moved services out to what we would call the cloud, to some type of data center or provider like Azure or AWS, where those services live in those environments. And so we're not worried about allowing traffic, say, to come in. How many organizations, for example, have email servers, within their environments? I would hope, especially if you're a retail organization, that you're not still in an environment where you might, have an email system inside of your organization. I think most have gone to some external, a Gmail and Office 365 or something like that. But the key here is really the outbound activity. What you do have still is a bunch of people now accessing information from the inside to the outside. Now, obviously, if they're accessing their Office 365, no big deal. But one of the best ways to actually identify malicious activity in your environment is actually just to watch what goes to the internet. watch the DNS requests that are being made from devices inside. That's where that's where you can really spot. For example, you've got activity that you see that's going, to China, Russia, some other place that you don't do business with or have any reason to be communicating with. And so you start to ask the questions, well, why do I have this traffic, here? So monitoring outbound control is huge, critical, and very effective. Monitor everything, monitor nothing. Traditionally, it's usually a very mature organization in the past that has monitored really anything, let alone the concept of monitoring everything. All these things that we're talking about really require you to make an effort to not only control things through policies, but to also be able to collect data so that you can identify when certain activities happen. And obviously that you have somebody that's monitoring those things, right? Mentioning that zero trust is, the idea is we want to get data constantly. So we want to have real-time information and so that we can use it in real time, right? So we can potentially find the malware before it spreads. Depending on how that malware works or that activity works, we might catch it before it does. It's delivers its payload and does its bad thing. So zero trust is the idea is data centric as opposed to device centric. So when you think about devices, is when you think about the physical aspect, that's typically traditionally it's like, okay, well, let's get the firewall, let's take all the devices, the computers, let's put them inside the firewall. Everything was about, okay, we've got these servers over here. Let's protect the servers and the computers. But with zero trust, we're more concerned about the data that you're getting to. So for example, if you have a point of sale application and it lives in the cloud, how effectively are you controlling access to that environment? How much information do you have, about that environment? And, and what types of controls do you have even within it, right? Who can do what? Some of this comes into sort of an application discussion of, what things can your operators do inside of your point of sale environment that may or may not be okay, right? Could they do something on accident? Could they do something on purpose? But when you're focused on zero trust, you're really looking at the end goal is the data. What's important to you and your organization? And how are you controlling that? Just put this up here just to get our minds in a good place. This is sort of the environment that we're talking about, generally protecting in the retail environment, the types of things: managers, PCs, printers, digital signage, point of sale, back of house. Some mobile POS stuff, the CXD, it just so happens that's the device that we call our device that we utilize, that we manage at the edge and at Shurian, but it could be any router or firewall, and then just connectivity to the internet. So, all right, so how does zero trust improve retail operations and security? Well, the first thing that you want to be able to do is, you want to be able to ensure that all users are identified and authorized. So that could be through your application, right? Through whatever, that's your point of sale application or some other business application that you have. One thing you might ask yourself is, are people using shared logins? If you have 15 employees, at a location, do you know when, employee A logs in and how long they log in for? Do you know if you have multiple employees using the same login account? Activities like that seem innocent and are probably not being done to negatively impact anything. But the reality of it is that when multiple people use the same user account or don't have to log in at all, you use access or understanding of what's going on in the environment, right? You don't know, it could be anybody. Ensure all machines are identified and authorized. So just like users, not trusting any of the machines, like if you've got, for example, your point of, your trusted or point of sale network where your items are that are transacting credit cards and dealing with your most core business application, your point of sale. how do you know when new machines are brought into that environment? Because that new machine could be, a bad actor that brings in, a laptop or something and plugs it into your environment. And so having an understanding of the machines that are on the environment, how they're controlled, is significantly important. And then obviously, you have to be able to monitor this information, pull it back into a centralized system. Somebody has to be watching. If you've got 150 stores out there and somebody plugs in a device into the trust network, that needs to pop up on somebody's screen somewhere and go, hey, at store 123, we just detected an unregistered device, on the network. Let's figure out what's going on. That may just be calling the store and saying, hey, we've seen this activity. Do you know what this is? Is this something you're aware of? You could even have controls in place where if it's not a registered device, it won't even let it, on the network. Right. But you have to have, things in place to be able to do that. Ensure operations of digital capabilities are available. The key thing here, there's a lot of effort that's been made, especially with PCI compliance, to protect credit card transactions. And that's obviously really important. It's a problem that over the past has really hurt some organizations badly because it's a very direct way, right? It's like you get somebody's credit card information and a bad actor can use that, can immediately use that to sell it.
All right. So not to beat that horse too much, but I think we get very focused on credit cards and because of all of the efforts around compliance. But I think, in my mind, we need to be as focused on just maintaining operational capabilities. I think the store of today is highly dependent on technology to do its job. And so whatever we can do to make that more capable and more consistent, we need to do, and this is part of it. Now, validating diverse digital partnerships. So maybe that's a fancy way to say, I know we've got a lot of vendors that are doing things for you for various reasons. Could be, security surveillance, could be monitoring your freezers. Could be a lot of different things. People you're allowing in, and a lot of those things that they're doing are using technology. I think back to one of the areas that I think has hit not just retail, but just a lot of businesses is like the security surveillance. When security surveillance stuff went from sort of out of band to the IP network digital world, really a lot of those vendors weren't really up to speed on how to secure that. They would, put these devices on the network, put them on the internet with default passwords that anybody can get to, just because that was just, they just didn't fully understand it. And of course, there's been a lot more awareness now, so I don't think that happens as much as it used to. But that's just an example of by having zero trust and not trusting these things and monitoring this type of activities, such as for example, you see when a new camera or a new DVR comes online, your security organization immediately knows, oh, what is this? Oh, how are they accessing this device? Are they accessing it from the internet? Who can access it, from the internet? So by implementing zero trust, you're able to assist these digital partnerships to make sure that they're operating properly. Protection from large-scale vulnerabilities. Yeah, so just usually if vulnerabilities are exploited in some significant way, you need to be able to see what's going on in the environment to see that. If you are tracking all the various things that are going on and you are exploited by a vulnerability, it should show up from a trending perspective because you should see a lot of activity in that direction. And then, like I said, just validates everything. We're not only are we trying to control things, but we're monitoring data. All right, so the challenges that I see for retail, one is the franchisee architecture. I list this as kind of a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge being that, and what I've seen in my experience is that many brands will make a pretty good effort at developing a program to support the franchisee and give them options, but they don't generally like to mandate. They don't, they like to allow their franchisees some flexibility and how they're spending their money. Because at the end of the day, it is, they're business owners and they're trying to make decisions to be the most profitable and successful, right? So the challenge with that is that, really the zero trust methodology is, like I allude to here, is really an enterprise methodology, meaning that, everybody's you sort of implement these technologies on a large scale for everyone. It allows you to see more information, allows you to get economies of scale. You're not going to go and silo these types of concepts in very small environments without probably causing you more pain. So that, I think that's one of the challenges is, I think more mature franchises see the opportunity to find good security solutions and help their franchisees understand why it's important that they implement these things, and also, why now? Like, why is it different now? I mean, I think, I'm not a retail owner, but I'd have to think, if I was, from what I've seen, that seeing the influence of the pandemic and technology and its influence on how the operations work is significantly changed. Is very organizations are very dependent, on these things. So I would hope to see that franchisees would be willing to invest properly to make sure that those capabilities are taken care of, right? When you get to the point where you can't do where you're going to lose a significant amount of business if you can't use your technology, then you need to make sure you take care of it. Machine authentication. I mentioned that earlier. This concept of knowing what devices are plugged in sounds simple, when I say it on here. In practice, it takes sort of a mature understanding. For example, you're a franchisee, you're an operator, an owner. You've ordered something, for your business, right? It's coming out on Tuesday. They're coming in to install something, and you've not coordinated with either your own internal IT or somebody else, and they get there, they plug this thing in, and it doesn't work because policy states you can't work unless you're a registered device. Now you call your provider or your internal IT or your computer person, or whoever you're using for that type of stuff, and now you're frustrated because like, hey, so and so's here, try and install this thing, it's not working, and okay, hold on, can you give me this information? There's obviously a back and forth. So it takes a little bit of understanding, why that's important, because obviously operators especially could get really frustrated if there's a layer of security added that prevents them, from doing their thing. Cost sensitivity. It's a business world that we're operating in. In most of retail, they're operating as efficiently as possible to make profits be where they need to be to operate. So it's understandable that these types of capabilities aren't going to necessarily be free. It doesn't mean it won't be potentially bundled in, or it can't be done in an efficient and effective manner. But like, that's one of the challenges. If somebody comes to your organization and says, yeah, we can do this, and it's going to cost your store an extra $100 a month, how are they going to react to that? They're like, oh no, I can't spend another $100 a month on security or technology. I'm already spending X. So that's a challenge. Security, the credit card data is not enough. This is what I kind of alluded to before. I mean, we definitely are making good grounds, and we have to continue to do what we need to do to secure credit cards, because just like our technology has changed, the mechanisms the bad actors use to exploit those things will change as well, right? So you're never done. I think we're keeping up good pace, both with things like PCI compliance has helped out significantly, and just technology vendors have baked those things into their product, but that has to keep going. But the key thing to remember is it's not enough. If your goal is to just check the boxes on the PCI compliance questionnaire, then you're probably not going to make any efforts to implement zero trust, and you're not going to be helping your business stay more secure so that all of its digital capabilities can operate when they're needed. needs a consolidated approach. This kind of alludes to that idea. One of the challenges with franchisees that even though they're representative of the brand and they're supposed to look alike, they're giving some autonomy sometimes, especially on technology decisions. And really, if you're looking at your brand and say there's 150 stores, really to go forward with this type of zero trust model, you need to be able to collectively look at all of your entities and bring them together. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to sign on, right? But you probably want one approach, right, for all those. So, when you're going to your franchisees and you say, hey, have you thought about what you're doing to protect, all your digital capabilities? You want to be able to say, here's a mechanism you can use, right? Here's an option, for you to use, as opposed to, oh yeah, I think you should do something about that. Have a nice day. And then of course, the franchisee's like, yeah, well, sure. I'll call you when my stuff doesn't work. And that's what we're trying to get away from. So the opportunities for retail. So just like the franchise architecture is a challenge, there's also, I think, opportunity for leadership, at the brand level, or, if you happen to be a franchisee owner that just owns a lot of, stores, there's an opportunity to lead and take these concepts and find solutions that work well for your brand and those organizations. There's a desire to protect the brand, right? I think, and that starts, I wouldn't say it starts, but I think that's, interconnected, right? Between if you are a franchise, that's interconnected between, the franchise and the franchisee. Obviously, the overall franchise wants to ensure that their brand name stays in a good light. You're a franchisee, you want the same, right? You want people to trust. You don't want people questioning whether or not they should utilize your service because of something they saw on the paper, or because, they stopped by, for to get something a week ago and they couldn't buy it or get it because you're down, your systems were down, for a period of time. Digital capabilities enhance performance. We've seen that significantly with the way we specifically work a lot in the Manchurian, that is, in the quick serve restaurant industry, so fast food. And we've really seen a lot of fast food places really take advantage of the environment that's been created with the pandemic, mainly because they have taken technologies like line busting and third-party delivery and online ordering and all those things, and they have, and they've accelerated their business with it. They've become a good option instead of having to potentially close down or not open their door because they can't get enough customers in during this time. Consolidation of information, this is where it comes. If we have this sort of enterprise model, the stores can utilize information from each store. So if we see a certain trend happening at one store, we can make sure to protect all the other stores at the same time. Fighting ransomware, in my mind, probably the biggest threat that we have in businesses in general, and I think this is no different for retail, is ransomware. It just kind of gets in the idea, if 10 of your point of sale systems pop up with the ransomware screen, one is, dealing with the ransom, potentially sucks, but even as much as just the operational impact, right? You can't use, those computers are going to have to be cleaned, wiped, dealt with, the impact it's going to have, on the business to utilize its digital capabilities is going to be seriously impacted. So. All right. So what type of zero trust capabilities might you be doing already? We talked a little bit about this earlier. Do your PS terminals require individual and secure logins? Do POS or other business apps limit access? Inside of your business apps, do you have different capabilities and permissions for different people, or are you controlling that? Is access to the POS monitored? Do you know if, for example, if managers are logging in at 2 a.m. in the morning, that may be normal. That may not be normal, for your business. Is there some things that you might be able to detect, if they were looking, would you question and go, I wonder why this person, is looking at this information at this time? Do you have network controls based on approved policies? Do you have restrictions on what device it can get to on the internet? Are you capturing security events in a SIM? So SIM is a security information and event management system. It's a fancy word for it's a tool that security operations centers use to collect information. So when we talk about monitoring all of these types of events, this is the type of tool where these events would go into, and then somebody would be monitoring this system to detect, say, for example, invalid logins, unauthentic, unregistered devices that come on the network. All that stuff is the SIM is a common term that you'll use for a technology that's utilized by an organization to monitor and detect anomalous behavior. Do you control which devices can be connected to your environment? Talked about that. Have you isolated guest access from the business? How do your guests utilize the internet? One thing here too is not just can they get to the trusted network, but do they use the same internet? Do you restrict how much of that internet that they can use? If your guests come in and consume all your internet bandwidth because, whether it's because they just so happen to be using a lot, or it's for, nefarious reasons, it still may impact, the performance on your primary business network. So how are you dealing with that? Do you test your environments for vulnerabilities? Do you do scans? Do you know what applications you have consistently running? What's being installed in your environment? And do you monitor inbound and outbound traffic? And I'll remind you that the outbound traffic is really a big one. I think if there was one thing I was going to start looking at, tomorrow, if I was an organization, it would be to, start looking at how much traffic's going to China, how much traffic's going to these, to various countries, assuming you're not doing some type of business with that country. All right, so 5 tips to get started. Ensure all access is uniquely authenticated and authorized, possibly multi-factor authentication, which is just like, the idea of, say, for example, if somebody's going into POS, maybe there's an employee number and a card swipe or something like that. Monitor access to the point of sale system. Hopefully your point of sale systems have the ability, you're using unique accounts and all that stuff as far as accessing those systems. Control and monitor outbound internet traffic. I mentioned that one. Limit capabilities or data flows from the network. That's more of like this general allow list type of functionality. For example, in our environments that we manage for customers, we usually work with the customers and find out like all the applications that they're using, for their POS and other business functions. And then we restrict outbound access to those. So that way on those very, on those point of sale networks or any other secure networks, we know exactly what traffic is going out. Control, authenticate, and monitor devices. And that's really, it's probably easier said than done, because what you're really looking at here is, what type of mechanism do you have in place that can you get to one, collect all of this information, and then is somebody watching it well enough to know when something bad is going on so that they can, so they can identify it, they can work with the business to, to resolve the issue and figure out what's going on. All right, Judy, that's all of my discussion. So I guess we are ready for Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Jason, for a great presentation. So now we'll do our live Q&A. If anyone's got questions, throw them in the queue. We got a few actually by email earlier today. So the first question, we're a small internal IT team.
Mm-hmm.
Is this strategy doable, or are we looking at needing outside resources?
Yeah, and I think it may come down to how large and complex is the entity you're trying to protect, right? I mean, if you're 2 stores, then it's possible with some tools out there, you might be able, with a small staff, you might be able to accomplish some things. Now the challenge with that then becomes, much of this is, how long does it take you to detect something? If something is discovered and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, how long before if you've got, say, one employee that's responsible for this and everything else, right, in the environment, oh yeah, he's also, or she's fixing computers and do all this other stuff. How effectively will they actually monitor the system? I think that's the challenge with that. So I think, because this is sort of a 24/7 type of capability, most entities will look at finding a partner, to do this with, someone that's already built out a team. And I would argue too, even with large organizations, not just small. I've worked with a lot of organizations that, are fairly significant in size, thousands of locations, and they're very focused operationally on their business and keeping it going. And so they can't necessarily focus or have the resources to build teams to, say, be a security operations center. And then there's obviously some technology that's involved here, whether you buy that and try to run it yourself, or you hire a managed service and allow them to use their technology and they manage it. Obviously, it's one of those things. You could probably do it cheaper. If you just buy something and have whoever you have on staff do it, but you have to wonder, are you really going to accomplish anything, or are you just going to buy some tech and give your IT person, one more thing that they probably won't have time to do.
Right. And I mean, no matter what, you have to do something in today's age because, there's just a study that, online and digital interaction is just going to keep blossoming, whether, the pandemic ebbs or not anytime soon. So our next question is, and you kind of covered this a little bit, I think, in terms of giving people tips, but what are some common missteps when people try and take the strategy on? You guys talk to a lot of companies, a lot of clients, and I'm sure you hear a lot of, kind of horror stories, but are there any common, missteps maybe you can share?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge with this is, I actually saw somebody post something about this the other day where it's like, it's fairly easy to buy tech. Some is, cheaper than others. But it's fairly easy for somebody to go, oh, we have this many devices. It's going to cost us $10,000 to buy this thing, and we'll have it for a year and we'll feel good about ourselves. And I think you see a lot of companies that will budget for something very black and white like the tech, and then they won't really, it's not that they won't be oblivious to the fact that they need people and processes to utilize it. They just, they just will fail at implementing those things, or they'll assume that, well, okay, this will just be one more thing that our staff will consume and start. And so this tech gets purchased. It may get implemented in some capacity, but at best, it just collects information and it's not being utilized in a proactive, manner.
Right.
That's probably the biggest thing, that I would see, is that people spending money on the tech, and so they get a component of it, but they don't have the corresponding people and services and processes to actually make sure that it's being used effectively.
Right. So we go way back to when you were talking about establishing a strategy. What are some things that a retailer or a restaurant should do even before bringing in the technology or the partner in terms of their own security infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I assume there's some things they should do kind of to get everything up and ready.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, what I would say is like what retailers should have been doing over the last, 5 to 10 years. And if you haven't, you're really behind, is, network segmentation. I alluded to that a little bit. Do you have your point of sale technology isolated to one environment? Like we said, this doesn't ensure that everything's going to be safe, but at least it's a start. The idea that you've broken apart the sort of Wild West from what is your trusted and your secure business information and capabilities. Do you have, what's type of internet? Do you have, we talked a lot about with this digital capabilities, most of it requires online connectivity. Do you have operators that are still opting for the $25 DSL, because it's $25. But I think I don't hurt anybody's feelings to say DSL is pretty poor internet technology compared to what is commonly available, either through fiber or cable or whatever. So I think, our locations looking at, okay, it may cost me 30 more bucks to go with cable or maybe a fiber option, but it's really worth it when you look at how the dependency that these locations, have on that stuff. So that's probably a couple things, that I would start to address earlier just to see where you're at. Is there, we still run into customers that don't have a concept of a sort of point of sale network versus a, manager's network versus a, this network. They just sort of throw it all in one place and hope, that nothing, bad happens. And so I think those are some good places to start. And then once you've identified that POS network is then to apply the associated policies and controls to only allow traffic out that's needed for business activity.
Right. I mean, it only takes one bad payment experience or a data breach to kind of drive home some of these basic things. And the point about having technology that's kind of like not able to fulfill your needs anymore. A lot of this was laid down, maybe 6, 8, 10 years ago. And the amount of payment processing and payment technology now being laid in, you need that network assurance and you need that uptime, and you have to secure everything. And, one of the things in retail that's come up is they're building networks now for store associates, off of mobile devices, where they're able to interact with customers and interact with the POS. But you have to secure all that. I mean, you're getting customer information on that system, you're making payments. And a lot of times I think they're just trying to plug it in and they're really not keeping a close eye on it. So, I think security, as it's been since day one, is the top element that any business, retail or restaurant, has to put, top of mind. And I think that's only going to get bigger, as we make more technology networks and plans.
And I do realize these are, they're business decisions going, that are taking place here. It's not in a vacuum. It's easy for someone in my place in the industry as a security representative to say, you need to be, spending more money, invest more in security. I mean, of course it makes sense, for me, that's my business. But I do understand that, these retailers, their business is selling things, and doing it. And I think, so they really have to consider, how important are these digital capabilities to functioning in my business? What does a bad, the conversation I use a lot with customers is think about what a bad day looks like. Like what does it look like if all of your point of sale systems are not available? What are you going to do? What does that day look like? How badly does it affect you? Now, if you're like, no big deal. Like it's not a big deal. Internet's down for 4 hours. We'll be all right. If that's how you feel and that's real based on, how it's going to impact your business, then that's your business. That's maybe the decision you need to make. If it's not, if it keeps you up at night, but if you were to run in that situation, well, then having solutions in place to help mitigate that are worth it. Right. So, and I think we're going more toward, I think over time we've gone, I think, 10, 15 years ago, you might've been able to say, maybe even slightly before the pandemic, oh yeah, all that technology stuff's great, but we still sell stuff. People still come into our store. People still come up to the counter and buy stuff. We're doing all right. Well, that shifted significantly, I think, with the pandemic. It's like those tools were needed and now more dependent on businesses meeting their goals.
Right. I mean, you think about the payment aspect too. It used to be sliding the card in and then swiping the card. And now the card doesn't even make contact with the reader. So, you really look at the evolution. The presentation was great, Jason. I want to tell everybody that to keep their eye out in their email. They'll get a link to a download. So you can download the presentation and hopefully share it. And again, Jason, thank you so much. And thank you, Naturian, for sharing your expertise. And I hope everyone has a great day.